welcome to episode 5 of the Fill in the Blank podcast. I've got with me Nick, and I'm going to let Nick tell you a little bit about himself. But Nick and I met. This is the first time we've actually communicated voice to voice, face to face. I'm going to let Nick tell you a little bit about himself. But we met on Twitter. He's a very clever, sharp, intelligent guy, conservative, gun owner, etc. So we kind of hit it off, and he might even tell you about the little joke we got going on Twitter, because I call him my son, and if anybody sees that, they'll think he's my son, but he's not. He is in my heart, but not my genes, my genetic genes, not my genes. So, Nick, why don't you just tell us a little bit about yourself, as much as you like, and then we can kind of get into some of the political conversations we were talking about.
Sure. Well, thanks for the introduction, Mark. I am excited to do this with you. I've never been on a podcast before, and I don't know, it seems like a fun kind of interview, like I've had job interviews and those aren't that great, but you can't really fail this, right?
Right.
So, yeah, a little about me. I live in southwestern Minnesota. I work in healthcare. I have been studying our political landscape in this country since I was 14, 15. I'll be 31 this year, so that's way over half my life.
Right.
Yeah, and as far as the dad joke goes, I don't really remember how it started. It's probably me being a smart ass or something.
Yeah, I forget what it was. It was kind of like you said something, and it was very clever, and there was another gal who I don't see on much anymore.
Yeah, I don't know what happened to her.
Who said, "Oh, that's really bright," and I said something about, "Yes, I'm very proud of my son," and she said, "Well, can't I be proud of my son too?" And I'm like, "Yes, you can." And so we were kidding around about being your parents, and that's kind of the joke. If anybody goes back on our timelines and sees that, that's the explanation for those zany madcap antics. So, Nick, I think you'd say you're conservative, right?
I would say that's fair. I've dabbled a little bit in libertarianism. There are some things about it that I'm not quite ready to accept. I think conservatism is more mainline. It's easier to live with. I actually had an email address when I was younger. It was Neocon Forever, which now I wish I had understood that term a little better.
Right.
Because I don't identify as a neocon.
Right.
But I've always had some kind of complex about wanting to be on the cutting edge of societal evolution, as Rush would say. And I've been a lifelong listener of Rush ever since I was maybe 10, when Mom would play him in the car. Recently, last few years or so, I haven't really listened a whole lot, just because my work schedule, it's not conducive to have a radio going. But when I'm on the road or when I'm at home, sometimes I'll still give them a listen. But my political journey, I would say, has been different than some. My brother and I both had the same parents, obviously. He grew up and went left. I grew up and went right. And I still get flack from him. I still mess.
How does that go at like Thanksgiving dinners? Like, do you talk politics? I mean, do you talk politics with one another? And
we have kind of a standing agreement, unspoken agreement, that that's the one thing we don't talk about. We save it for the texts afterwards. And it's not ideal because something as really stupid as a political difference shouldn't affect a family's dynamic that much, but it has. So I'm on board with just leaving it alone. But I've been bombing his phone with all kinds of COVID-19 news and political election news and whatever. He's a good sport about it. we go back and forth, but we were both at the point where we both know neither of us are going to change our mind, but it's still fun to try.
Right.
And back soon after the Burisma news hit with Biden, um, he texted me and was looking for my opinion on it. He's too proud to say that he doesn't follow politics.
Right.
But I know he doesn't because his level of awareness is so low. He just basically parrots whatever
Right.
CNN tells him.
Right.
So I dropped him probably a 2-page text on all of the things that have brought us up to that point. And when he's met with, that volume of information, sometimes he doesn't really know where to go with it. So he kind of pivots to something else. But, he knows about other things that I have no clue about. He's a smart guy, but he's just not. We don't have the same interests or this even interests that mesh that we can talk about civilly without it.
So you just said something that kind of piqued something in me. So Thomas Sowell, who I think you probably know.
I've read Basic Economics cover to cover.
Yeah. So he's got several theories about intellectuals, or he's got a theory about an intellectuals that has a lot of parts to it. And one of the basic contentions he makes is that nobody is good at everything, and that you might be good at one or two things, but you're not going to be good at everything. But
Yep.
Liberals, or those on the left, especially those in academia or intellectuals, have a tendency to believe that because they're so freaking deep in whatever it is, whether it's law or political science or biomechanics or quantum physics, that they then that kind of gives them this mantle of superiority over everybody else. And he goes through and lists just how ridiculous that is and how people have screwed things up. And when I look at guys like Paul Krugman or Tom Friedman, they are wrong 90% of the time. But they just think that they are so intellectually superior. And so he goes through that explanation. And what I've found is, and it happened to me the other day, a guy that had to tell me he was a college professor basically started in on me. And I said, okay. I responded to a question. I can't remember what it was. I know what it was. It was climate change. He said, you're probably one of those crazy climate deniers. And I said, oh, great. We're going to talk about something with some substance to us. I said, do me a favor and tell me what the most prolific greenhouse gas is. And he immediately shut the conversation down. And it was because the most prolific greenhouse gas by far is water vapor. And you go to the EPA website where they list greenhouse gases, it's not even shown. You go to other places, it's not even shown. Why is it not shown? Because no one can figure out what impact it has versus the other greenhouse gases that are such a small percent of the total, right? And so you were talking about how he doesn't know, so he just parrots. That's what I have found. So it's very difficult to have a meaningful conversation with a lot of people on the left because they won't admit that they don't know something. So they either make something up, which when you refute, they refuse to say that it's incorrect, or they change the subject. So you never get to the heart of the matter of the issue that you're trying to talk about. That's what I've found, and it's been extremely frustrating lately. The other thing I'll do with these folks is they're firing away tweets to say, listen, why don't you and I do a video podcast or a video cast or a podcast, just like you and I are doing. And you've seen the other ones I've done. I mean, I'm not. I take a very, very aggressive approach on Twitter for good reason, because the people on Twitter are that 14% of the population that are pretty much cemented in place in terms of their ideology. So it's 8% on the left, it's 6% on the right. There's a study on tribes that I thought was really good that I believe those numbers. And those are the people that are on Twitter for the most part. And I'm not trying to change their minds, but there are some people that creep into a more centrist area. And those are the people I want to have a conversation with, because those are the minds that might be able to be turned. Those are the minds that might look at the facts and say, you know what, you're right. We've been getting lied to quite a bit. Like with this coronavirus stimulus package. I mean, anybody that looks at what Nancy Pelosi wanted to put in that bill, let alone what's in the bill already that's pork, okay? So the $2 trillion bill, not the $4 trillion bill, the $2 trillion bill. I mean, I went through a list. I mean, we've got the Kennedy Center. We've got Native American Indian museums. I mean, you can go down the list, and it's all pork. I mean, it's just wasting our money.
My favorite one was the funds for Native American transgendered people affected by climate change. That was my favorite one.
Okay, I did not see that. Okay, but I mean, this stuff is just like, for people not to understand that we on the right, conservatives, think that is just absolutely 100% loony. I mean, we can't even communicate. It's like we're speaking two very different languages, German and English or something. I mean, that it's just stunning to me how we've crossed this barrier from facts and truth, where there is no truth. You can have your truth, I can have my truth. That one just blows my mind. I mean, I can't help but, I can't even say it without grinning. And then that facts aren't facts. Well, those are your facts. Like, I hear that. Those are your facts. Those are not my facts. No, facts are facts. Like, it's 72 degrees right here. We've got a thermometer. It's 72 degrees. No, it's not. It's 68. I say it's 68. I mean, it's crazy. And the whole gender thing and all the rest, it's really quite bizarre. I think it's just quite bizarre. And I think we're going to have to really fight back hard. As I said to someone this morning, I think politics right now, it always has been, but right now everybody needs to understand it is a full contact sport. And if you're looking for people to have decorum and dignity and be cordial, you have no idea what's going on. I mean, this is a war. And I think those people that won't look at truth and facts and things like that, who are mainly the political Democrats, not Democrat voters, but the Democrat politicians, they need to literally be ground to dust, because they don't understand compromise. They can't be trusted. I mean, we see what's going on right now. Nancy Pelosi now is saying, well, I want another bill, right? She lost on that bill, and now she wants to present another one so she can get her bill passed. And it's like it never ends. So it's like they're rabid dogs. I mean, what do you do with a rabid dog? You have to put it down. That party has to be put down, because I don't think there's any way to salvage it. I keep waiting for someone to rise up and say, enough of this. Some leader in the Democrat Party. But I can't even tell you who that would be. I don't know if you've looked at that and said, who would it be? Who have I seen that seems to be reasonable? Maybe Tulsi Gabbard. I don't like her policies, but she might be it. I mean, I really can't think of anybody other than her.
She's the yardstick nanny I think the party could use.
Right.
And that is why she's been suppressed by the party for a year, at least.
More.
Because she fits all of their boxes that are important to them. The identity politics game.
Right.
Her race, her ethnicity, her gender, her military service, where she represents Hawaii. I mean, the part of the problem is there's so much identity politics at work, and that's what dovetails into what you were saying about my truth, fact checking, all of that. But when you turn it around back to them, all of a sudden it's a second standard. And there needs to be some set of rules that everyone can play by. But see, if we had one set of rules, then they'd lose because we come at emotion with ideas, or at least with critical thinking. And if you apply critical thinking to many of the emotional arguments that we face, they'd evaporate. And that's been something that's amusing to see because it's contributing to the death of the party. But at the same time, they are trying to take as many people down with them as they can.
Right.
And then you were talking about moderates. I think it'd be great to track down a Democrat that's walked away from the plantation. Someone who said, you know what, I voted Democrat, but not this time. They could probably give us insights we didn't even consider. Because if we've never voted Democrat, we don't know what it's like to actually be like that. And then they would have to have a significant shift to stop being a lifetime Democrat to coming over to, the Trump train, basically, which is not even the Republican Party that we're all used to seeing. It's taken on a life of its own. It's the Republican Party of the 90s meshed with the Tea Party, taken on a whole new identity. So it would be fascinating to see what caused that departure, especially at this point in the first term when we have potentially a second or third term coming up.
Yeah, and I think it would have to be someone who isn't a politician. So there's the guy, I forget his name, in New Jersey who switched parties, became a Republican. I forget his name. So I think most, if not all, politicians are in the job for a reason that it's not in our best interest, right? They're not going there to serve. They're going there to take. They're going there to experience something because they've got ego drive, money drive, whatever it is, and they're not there to serve. They're not there to try to move the country forward, which is the reason why I'm running, and it's the reason why I'm so hyperbolic at times on Twitter to try to shake people up. But we're in a war, and we have to speak plain, common truth. We can't be sugarcoating things. And if it upsets people, like I upset someone this morning that was a conservative, because I call these people that were looking at this USNS Comfort coming into New York. I mean, New York is the hot spot, the place. And these people are all there crawling over each other to take pictures of this ship coming into the harbor. No social distancing or anything like that. And I said, listen, these are the word I used. I said, these crap balls are going to be the ones that are going to get this. And they're going to have the respirators because Cuomo wasn't prepared. So he's just been whining about it and bitching and complaining. And so the president's just sending him stuff because, it's one of those things. Well, if I don't send him and he has the problem, even though I think he's crying wolf, I'm going to look bad. So I'm going to send them and everybody's happy. And so what if those respirators are there and then we have an outbreak in Columbus, Ohio, or you have an outbreak in southern Minnesota? I'm like, these are the crap balls that will be taking up those respirators, those vents, and we won't get them. And part of my family could die. Part of your family could die. Part of anybody in the Midwest family could die because they whine the most. And this gal came back and said, I've got to, that earns you an unfollow because you shouldn't call other human beings crap balls. Well, you know what? They are crap balls. And they're selfish. And I repeat this now all the time. I haven't had to repeat it for a long, long time because it was like, Sunday school lesson from the wife of our priest where she said, God commands you to love your neighbor. That doesn't mean you have to like your neighbor. That doesn't mean you have to hang out with your neighbor. But you need to love your neighbor, and when your neighbor needs you, you have to help them. And if you know they're hungry, you feed them. If you know they're thirsty, you give them something to drink. If they don't have shelter, you put a roof over their head. But it doesn't mean you have to like them, and it doesn't mean you have to not tell them they're doing something that's either wrong or inappropriate. Now, people will say, well, that's quite judgmental. Well, at times you have to be judgmental about things like that. If you've got standards that you live by and someone is trying to impinge on those standards, or you see them ruining their life or taking advantage of someone else or being selfish, you need to call them out. And all I was doing was calling them out, and I was doing it somewhat hyperbolically because I wanted to get attention. But I got the attention of someone who wanted to be on their high horse and be virtue signaling, and that's fine. I mean, that's fine. But I don't believe, I think it was she, I'm not sure, but I don't believe she's a true conservative because she wanted to get, so this is the, having too much of a heart, she wanted to give them a pass. And I'm like, well, if you give them a pass, you might as well give the people in Washington a pass, Washington State a pass, and in California a pass, and in Louisiana, New Orleans, and in Florida, and we'll just all get the coronavirus, and 200,000 or 300,000 elderly people will die, and we'll all move on. Bernie Sanders will be happy as long as he doesn't get it because there'll be more. The justification for Medicare for all will be cheaper because there'll be less elderly people. Like, come on, so. Little irritated. I'm sorry, it kind of popped off there, but it just really bothered me. And I guess I finally got down on paper, or in words, how I feel about that kind of thing. You're either on board this train to move us back to somewhere in a midpoint that makes sense for everybody, or you're not. So I don't know how you feel about that, but man, quite frankly, I was pissed off.
Yeah, there's a lot to consider there. First of all, I would say that the issue with the masks and the ventilators, it's again being critical thinking or emotional. Because Cuomo said that, we don't have these, we don't have access to them, and we need some. So Trump was like, well, we have a storehouse full of them, but if that's not enough for you, we can get more going. And a quick shout out to Mike Lindell. He is a true patriot in this state. So the news that he made yesterday made me so happy. And he's cranking out 50,000 a day. But with Cuomo and Trump, he needed the ventilators and the masks, and now it made it happen. So he takes the wind out of the sails. You have a concern, you have a need. We fill the need. What do you need now? Well, we need drugs. Okay.
Boom.
I told the FDA
Did you see that?
Fast track hydroxychloroquine. Now it's approved. Now you can start issuing it. What else do you need? Well, we need hospital space. There's a ship there in 6 days. What else do you need? If you apply critical thinking and you listen to the requests that people have, it takes the wind out of the sails of complaining. And that is not my truth, but that is the truth because that's what happened. And the other thing about the whole social distancing thing,
I'm betting, and I hope I'm right, that ship never takes on one patient.
You think so?
Yeah. I've looked at the numbers, and the numbers that they're talking about just don't make sense to me. And I'm an engineer, right? I'm not an epidemiologist, but I know math and I know statistics. And I understand spread, and I understand logarithmic growth versus linear growth. And I understand the difference between being infected asymptomatically, being infected symptomatically with, light indications of the disease, having to be in the hospital but not ventilated, elderly, compromised, etc. And I just,
Comorbidity, another huge issue.
I'm sorry?
Comorbidity, another huge issue.
Oh, huge, huge.
There was a post I had on Twitter and on Facebook a couple weeks ago. It was a European doctor. I don't remember which nation. I want to say Austria, but I don't remember. And he said that in his country, when he was the head of the health department, they saw comorbidity a lot. And he suggested that many of the COVID deaths that we're seeing are not from COVID-19. They are from other issues like influenza or heart conditions. And when the person passes away, they have COVID-19 also. So if you consider that the early numbers were between 3 and 9 or 3 and 14% of coronavirus mortality, if you account for comorbidity, it goes down to less than 1%.
Right. I think 90% of the people in Italy that had died at the time that they published this statistic had at least 3 other ailments at the time, whether it be high blood pressure. I'm going to assume I'm going to assume that because there were 3, that they were, some of them were more mundane, some of them were less mundane, like asthma or whatever. So, for example, when they report on so-and-so died and they give a report and there's a very emotional kind of story about, this was someone's grandfather or grandmother, whatever, you can understand they're elderly, their immune system isn't as strong, but every now and again you see a story about a younger person, and I become so cynical that I literally Google every name of everybody that's on a story. And every single time when you Google, you find out that they had asthma or they had HIV or they had something that caused them to have a compromised immune system that resulted in the death because it was one of the components. I'm at a loss for trying to explain it, but the comorbidity thing, I think, is just the way to put it, that they were suffering from and had held at bay severe asthma. And this one nurse in New York, he had held at bay severe asthma and HIV to stay alive. And then he got the coronavirus and he died. It's terrible, right? He's a healthcare worker. He's a hero. I understand that, but I'm sorry?
Every death is a tragedy.
Yeah, absolutely. Like President Trump said the other day when asked that, how many deaths are acceptable to you? Like, you've got to be kidding me. I mean, he looked at them like, you're some animal, and he should have. But I mean, this guy, I'm trying to figure out, why was he working with COVID-19 patients with that? Like, who in their right mind as let's say a nursing manager would allow him to work in that unit knowing that he had severe asthma and was HIV positive? I mean, I just don't understand that mentality. It almost seems, it's almost akin to death by cop. I mean, I'm thinking about that and I'm like, what?
Setting yourself up for failure.
Well, right, and it's not. I'm not even sure how to put this, but with a compromised immune system, he was almost sure to get it at some point in time. And he's working with other people that are going to be with him when he doesn't have protective gear on, right? So
putting them at risk.
Putting them at risk. And I'm like, this just seems very foolish to me, is all I would say. And again, it's a tragedy. I know some people will view this and say, you're heinous for bringing this up or whatever. But we've got to talk about things like this, because I believe, because that to me was just foolhardy and
avoidable.
Absolutely avoidable. Absolutely avoidable. It wasn't like
And
he's
then,
just on the street and someone sneezed and he got the vapor droplets or whatever. Yeah.
well, and for how militant the media is about social distancing, we have all of these people in Florida on spring break,
Right.
and
Did
New
you see
York
the heat map?
subways do not down.
Did you see the heat map of the cell phones there and where they ended up going afterwards?
I've seen a couple heat maps. I don't remember.
I'll send you that Twitter. It essentially tracked all the cell phones that were there during, I think it was 2 or 3 weeks in March, and
Oh
then
yeah, all over the
tracked
world.
those same addresses when they went home. A big
Hmm.
a big kind of blossom in Chicago. It's mostly a swath. It's from like the Mississippi to, let's say, 100 miles of the East Coast, and so it's like the Ivy League New Yorkers. They weren't going to Fort Lauderdale for spring break. They were going to Europe or something, which is another
Yeah.
issue. But if you look at this heat map, uh, and it'll be very very interesting to see. There was a lot in Michigan, Illinois, Indiana, not so much in Ohio, but still enough to be concerning. And
Well, the
then
other thing to remember is all the snowbirds are going to start heading home soon. And
yeah,
they're going to be coming in the airports. They're going to be going to, rest stops on the highways, restaurants. You know, when at first I didn't really agree that we'll see a secondary spike, but I was at a hospital yesterday for not my health, but someone else's. And the nurse there was saying how, yeah, well, we've got my parents and my wife's parents, they're coming back from Florida in their 90s. And it's like, well, yeah, I suppose we didn't think about that. But then we have people all clumping together to take a picture of a naval ship. And we've got subways in New York, which are not running as normal. Um, where else? California, everyone's out doing whatever. So, how serious really is this distancing issue?
I will tell you
People,
where I will tell you in Columbus, Ohio, it's serious. I mean, we're
you're all in your houses.
yeah, or if you're out shopping, like I was out doing some grocery shopping this morning, and nobody really came within 10 feet of me, 15 feet of me, let alone 6 feet of me, unless they had to pass me in an aisle very quickly. But I mean, and it
Sure.
wasn't that crowded, and people were like doing their business and getting out of there.
Sure.
Um,
Well,
so
and that goes to another issue, which, like I said at the beginning, would be more of a libertarian issue. There are people who are saying that it's justified for the government to demand people stay home or limit time out in public. I understand that in concept, but at the same time, I don't feel anyone has a right to tell me what I can and can't do in public, as long as I'm not, violating someone else's rights to be there. And
well,
then yesterday,
but wouldn't
there
they
was a
say that you're potentially putting other people in danger or threatening them because you could have the virus and not know it?
I mean, yes, potentially, but that's also living in a state of what if. I mean, it's debilitating. And for myself personally, I've already been sick for over a month this year. I was sick from January, all of February, finally stopped showing any kind of symptoms. I think it's possible I had COVID-19.
I
I
think
don't
my
know.
girlfriend had it.
Yeah,
Yeah,
it sucks.
mid
If that's what
January.
it was, it
It was
sucks.
awful. And I've done a
You
tweet
feel
on this. Like,
made out of jello.
yeah, I did a tweet on this about the timing. So follow my logic here. China says, I think on New Year's Eve, they announced that there was this virus that they had found. Not sure that timing exactly. I've seen conflicting stories, but let's say it's January 1st. we know that they were hiding it, and we found that they knew about it in December, late November. Uh, there were some studies done by some folks at Oxford that came out last week that showed kind of a confidence analysis of different timings with the virus. And one of them was how long was it from the time the first person got infected to when anybody knew about it? And that time frame of all the time frames they were looking at had almost 100% confidence interval. It was like crazy. They had crazy confidence in the model in terms of testing it. So that says, let's say beginning of November or beginning of October. So I went and looked at the flights from Wuhan to other places, and there are tons. They go everywhere, right? It's a big city, 10 million people, and they go everywhere. So my contention is there were people that were infected with that virus for months and months that were traveling overseas. They were in Europe, they were in the United States, they were everywhere. And that many more of us have had this virus than the CDC is admitting, or the National Institute of Health, or the World Health Organization. Don't get me started on them.
Because we didn't get tested because there was no panic yet.
Right, and if you've had it, right, if you've had it, like my girlfriend had all the symptoms, right? And then I heard about folks dying from the flu that were like 29-year-old athletes that maybe had asthma or something like that. But it was like shocking that this strapping 29-year-old athlete would die from the flu, right? Same time frame. And so my contention is that a lot of people have had this. I've heard from other people that are very close to me, and then other people on Twitter, and that this lockdown may end up having been for naught, that we're going to find that the numbers aren't any different than other flus. And what people can't get into their head when they see these huge numbers is those numbers are going up because we're testing people, not because anything is happening necessarily. It could be.
It's been present, and we're just realizing it now.
Right. And the other thing we're not testing is, so I would love to have my girlfriend get tested to find out if she's had it. I'd also like to get tested myself, because one of the new things that is coming out is I've got high blood pressure. It's treated, but I take a drug called losartan. And they found that losartan may block, or does block, one of the pathways for one of the enzymes that's required for this virus to essentially stick or get to a cell to inject its RNA, DNA, whatever it is I forget how it works once it takes over the cell. But I'd like to see myself, and I'd like to see other people that have been ill that have said, hey, I think I had that, because it was the exact same symptoms: headache, fever, then that cough that's just, I mean, I said to my girlfriend, I think you ought to go get a chest x-ray. I think you've got pneumonia. And she talked to a doc, but the doc said, let's just wait. And then miraculously, she seemed to get better. But it was weeks. It wasn't just a few-day flu. So I think there are many more people that have it.
Yeah, it's very likely. All of the same symptoms I had for about 4 or 5 days. They were lesser near the end, and then I think someone else I was close to gave me norovirus too. So
great.
It was a rough few weeks at the beginning of this year. But you're right. If people are feeling symptoms, I think they should get tested. And it doesn't cost them much, if anything, maybe an hour or two in the hospital. And if they're not positive for it, or they're not ill, that's wonderful. They should be helping to spread more awareness of, you know, how to stay clean and how to stay healthy,
Right.
drink a lot of vitamin C and all that to everyone else. And in the meantime, though, I feel like they should be allowed to go back to their jobs, back to their lives, because the the stimulus check that we may or may not receive that was voted on, I mean, it just doesn't seem like a good solution. It's going to be what, $800 billion just in relief checks, and then we're going to have to pay it back next April at tax time. How about you just cut off $1,000 of taxable income this year?
Yeah,
You got until July to figure it out.
it,
You know,
what people seem to not think about is that that money was theirs if they paid taxes. So taxes were paid. Taxes were paid. Go to the government. Now the government's going to give it back to you. And they're going to give you less than you paid in because there's administrative costs and all the rest.
and you're going to thank them for it.
Yeah, you see, yeah. I mean, it's like Nancy Pelosi wants thanks for what she did for people. Thank you for giving me some of my money back. I'm getting none back, by the way.
I think you make too much money, huh?
Yeah. So I'm going to get none back. And I'm okay with that. I'm okay with that. But I can't think of anything that government does better than the private sector can do. And I also think that we lack a lot of personal responsibility in this country. We really do need to get back to, rather than having people make excuses for why they can't or won't do something, having to give us a reason why they won't, that makes sense. Excuses are like belly buttons. Everybody's got one. And many people have more than one. So, Nick, let's wrap this up. This has gone much longer than I usually go. I might split this into 2 pieces so people can watch it, or 3 pieces so people can watch it. But I think it was a good discussion. We haven't even gotten to any of the really good stuff. We've talked about the coronavirus, but which is front and center right now. But I think there's a lot of good things in terms of politics and just life in general that we can talk about. I want to thank you for doing this. I'm trying to get more people to do this. I mean, my idea, and I don't know if I spent much time telling you this, but my idea is that there isn't really a platform for people who are just average Americans to voice their opinion where someone else can hear it and then comment upon it or say, gee, there's some commonality there with the way I think. Because a lot of us, for the longest time, kept our mouths shut because we just didn't want to have to deal with the harassment from the left. I'm so far past that now. So far past that. I'm like, bring it. But a lot of people haven't. And, you were kind enough to do a video with me for the first time so people can see how this would work. But people can be on the phone. They can be anonymous, totally anonymous. I can even anonymize their voice if we plan it ahead of time so we can leave
Now
space.
you tell me that.
Yeah.
I wanna be
That's the gotcha that was in the contract. But I could even do that if we left enough time between me asking questions and them talking and vice versa. But I want to give people a voice, and it doesn't have to go this long, and it can be about anything, and I can move it along if they would like to have questions asked of them, or they can just feel free to talk. But to do a couple of things. One, to put more personality and more humanity behind a Twitter handle. And 2, kind of build this movement. Like, one of the things that I'd like to talk about that I was going to bring up before and we moved on, but I am very, very concerned about what happens in 2024 when Donald Trump is no longer in office. Who becomes president? What is their platform? Do they keep moving this Make America Great, Keep America Great kind of strategy forward? Or do we fall back into the swamp? And I think there is a very high probability that we fall back into the swamp, because while Trump and his administration have done some amazing things in the past 3.5, 4 years, and they will do amazing things in the next 4 years, they will have only scratched the surface of what needs to be done. And I don't think the typical American voter of either persuasion really understands how bad it is in Washington, how dirty and corrupt it is in Washington. It's a pandemic of corruption there. And people want to say, oh, I know my congressperson and I know they wouldn't do that. Let me tell you, I would bet more do than don't break laws and do corrupt things and line their pockets or the pockets of their friends and family through proxy corruption.
Trading.
I'm sorry?
Like insider trading from last week.
Oh, my God. I mean, and that's not proxy by corruption. That's just flat out corruption. But I'm talking about things like Biden's son getting $1.5 billion from the Bank of China to start this private equity firm when they've never done anything like that before, right?
Yeah.
So it's corruption by proxy, proxy corruption. Peter Schweitzer came up with that word in his book, Secret Empire and Profiles in Corruption, which, they're almost like a
sharp description.
Oh, man. And it's absolutely correct. And the evidence is irrefutable. I mean, this isn't just where there's smoke, there's fire. This is a raging fire. And people just want to, just ignore it. So anyway, thanks for coming on with me. I really appreciate it. Thanks for doing the video with me. And we will certainly do this again. But if you've got friends that would do this with me, I don't care if they're on Twitter or not. My goal is to just have conversations with normal people, not pundits, not someone that's trying to sell books or something like that, just to have a discussion of American voters and get this stuff out there and educate people. So I thank you for that.
Yeah, no problem, Dad.
Okay, son, you may be proud today. All right, that's great.
I could see if my brother'd be interested.
Well, that'd be interesting, and the three of us could do it if you wanted. Like, if you feel more comfortable doing that, we can do as many. We can do 3, 4, 5, whatever.
Wow.
Now that I've got the pro version of Zoom, we can do whatever we'd like to do. All right. Cool.
Well, thank you.
All right. Stay healthy, stay safe, say hello to your wife, and keep everybody that's suffering from this in your prayers.
I will do that. You
All
do
right.
the same, and good luck kicking out Rob Portman.
Yeah. Uphill battle, but I'm going down to the wire. I don't care if I have any money. I'm just going to do it.
Yeah.
So, yeah, I appreciate that. Appreciate it.
All right.
All right, Nick.
We'll see
See you later, man. Thank you. Bye-bye.